Moving on to tonight's Zoom, the three guests, hopefully you can see. As I'm looking at it, certainly top left, Gail May. I think most of you know probably most of you remember as the owner of Spirit and Louis. Gail famously visited Walthamstow before she was born, and it's in view of that momentous event that we have the screen behind me tonight. And of course, Gail's been actively involved ever since. Carly, bottom right corner, again, throughout her life has been involved in the industry. Dad being a trainer. Carly herself is a multiple category 1 winning trainer, and I believe is now outside the industry, but still actively involved, as we can see. And bottom left, Kim Sanzoni, whose own upbringing was in she's a Lancashire lass, was on the flaps primarily, I think Blackpool, with her dad David training. Went on, I think, as I recall, went to become a Betting Shop of the Year manager finalist, and went on to fame at Romford and within Coral, particularly at Romford, as probably the best PR the industry's had. If you've ever enjoyed a free meal for four at a Category 1 final as an owner, it's almost certainly down to Kim, because that was Kim's initiative. There's, along many other things. She also spent some time as the boss at Lifford, and again is actively involved. And welcome to all three. I would like to start by saying that when Mark Bird originally suggested to me he was going to be setting up the ambassadors, the Greyhound ambassadors, and my original thought was it was going to be a little bit of I don't know, gloss or glamour or nothing with too much kind of substance. And then I saw who he'd invited to become his ambassadors, and I'm surprised that he made it so difficult for himself, because he was never going to get an easy ride with these three, let alone the others. So, ladies, over to you. Now, I've been unusually professional on this and suggested beforehand that each of you might like to at least raise a particular subject. And I thought we would start off with Carly and her chosen subject, as they say in all the best programmes. It was pretty much, I believe, about track conditions and the way the industry presents itself. Carly, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talk recently with the obviously the winter conditions that tracks are facing. There's been a lot of meetings called off early doors, which has been great. Preparing sort of trainers so they don't have to have a wasted journey. And obviously, it's been testing conditions for everyone really. Getting meetings called off, if a track's obviously unsafe is the number one thing. But if tracks are sort of unsure whether a meeting's going to be on, I think trainers should be given the go ahead quite early on in the day that there's a possibility that it could be off, rather than making trainers travel, reschedule it for a few days time. I think that is such a better way of handling things, as sort of proved on the Saturday with the Monmore fixture being cancelled, but trainers did travel. The meeting was called off very late. It is one of them things, but I think calling a meeting off early part of the day, I think, is very important.
Yeah. Do you think maybe there should be a rule or a protocol to say, trainers will be guaranteed that by a certain time they should be made aware?
Yeah, I mean, Monmore, there was a lot of discussion on social media on Saturday. Monmore's a fantastic track. It's actually my favourite track. Always has been. They're so, so well organised there. Everyone enjoys going racing there. They have some cracking meetings on throughout the year, cracking competitions. But yeah, I do think, especially, I mean, it's only a couple of weeks of the year where we get this bad weather, and it's generally in February. So I just think, give the trainers a bit of a heads up. They don't want wasted journeys. They don't want the dogs travelling there and having a wasted journey. So I just think, cancelling the meetings early on and not having to run on a very slow going, which in my opinion isn't ideal. Does suit different, dogs are different. It does affect dogs in different ways. So I think, to say it's okay to run on a very, very slow track is wrong, really. I think they should be,
Yeah,
there should
I
be
think
some.
some of the journalists have been getting a little bit involved in that, and I'm not really sure that we're qualified to say. I mean, I have a background in kennels, but um, there's a suggestion that, well, slow tracks are safe tracks, and that's not necessarily true, is it? I mean, we've got a lot of muscle injuries in particular, and if we're talking about muscle injuries, is there a worse injury than a gracilis? I mean, you'd probably suggest that a gracilis is a worse injury than a broken hock. That they just don't come back from gracilis injury, very, very
No,
rare.
not at all. I mean, I was having a discussion with my dad. He's been in racing all his life, and he's very knowledgeable on track conditions, preparing the track. I think he's very good in his opinion.
Yeah,
And I had the conversation with him about what was said, and he just said it's ridiculous. He said, these people don't work in kennels; they've never have done. Like I said in my post on Twitter, all dogs are different. So, dogs are affected, some may love it, some may not, but I don't think that they should run in them conditions, and I definitely don't think trainers should be traveling in them conditions either. I just think it's not right. But that's my opinion.
yeah. Does anybody else, Gail?
Yeah, I think that's one of the aspects with the tracks that we'd like to see. I know a few months back we pulled together as ambassadors a whole group of points that we wanted to put forward to the tracks. With sort of different levels of success with it, to be quite honest. But I know Mark Moisley has put some of it forward for us. And sort of up in the professionalism at the tracks, and what I suppose. Partly it's aesthetic. I know, of course, the conditions the dogs are running in is so important, but obviously it's also important that we can attract people to the tracks. So, those we sort of put forward quite a few ideas on that side of things, just to make it look slicker, make it look better. And I think, to be fair, looking at some of the tracks now on, RP and on Sky, I think, some of those things have improved a bit. And I know, Kim, you were talking, weren't you, the other night about one of your ideas about that as well, to try and get it a bit competitive.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the track, I think we've moved on massively in welfare after a dog's training career. And I think, going back to what Carly was saying, we've then got to consider, whilst they're in training, that we're also conscious of welfare, not only in the kennels, but at the tracks as well. I think that's sometimes overlooked. And as Carly said, that travelling to and from a track can have a massive effect on some dogs. I'm not saying all dogs. And, obviously it's not great for the trainer, but you just really don't know deep down what effects that's having on the dog that thinks it's going racing, and whether that can have a long-term effect on them, sort of on perhaps on the next race. And these are things we need to look at, is not just welfare after retirement, but throughout. And as Gail was saying, in terms of the tracks, it would be nice to have sort of a little bit of a list that all tracks sort of agree to. I'm not saying it's set in stone or it's rules and regulations, but just a little, for want of a better word, kite mark of agreed standards that everybody is happy to agree to, that's not too difficult to implement, that will benefit the tracks themselves, the trainers, and most of all the dogs.
Yeah, we had the conversation. I did a piece yesterday with Peter Harnden, and we were saying that it's one area of the industry that, I don't know, it's not that strongly monitored, and tradition there, that in terms of the clout that the tracks have, but surely we should have a cut-off point to say, and I think Mommel did the right thing by cancelling, without any question. But let's have a cut-off point. What time is a trainer's going to expect to leave? And if by that time we can't guarantee the meeting, then we have to take a chance and turn it off, because tell the trainers that the meeting is off. And if, I mean, texting is so simple to say, stand by your beds until 2 o'clock or whatever the time may be. And at 2 o'clock, you will find out one way or another whether or not that dog's running. But it's not enough to simply to say to trainers, oh, well, we've paid your diesel. Yeah, by all means, you're still going to get occurrences that you can't allow for, and nobody's suggesting that, as I said, that anybody's made the wrong decision ultimately. But maybe as Carly said originally, maybe these decisions need to be made earlier for everybody's sake, rather than simply say, well, there's your 50, 60, 70 quid diesel. What are you moaning about? But looking further on, I saw some notes that were sent through. Carly, it wasn't just about kenneling. You had some other views as well in relation to, I think, track presentation and the way the industry does things.
I mean, there's a lot of tracks that do, look fantastic. I was watching Hove on the box the other night, and their track looked amazing. All the paraders look very smart in their blue coats and the black trousers. They look really smart. So Hove, fair play to Hove. They really look good on the box, but and so do other tracks. I mean, they have really sort of upped the game, with making things look smarter. But there are some that don't. I know there's a little bit of a thing flying about paraders, not knowing which dog's which on parade, because obviously they're in their own coats, they're not in track coats, so you can't sort of see which dog's which. But there was a few ideas floating around about maybe having some kind of arm strap, which indicates which dog is in, who's holding, who's handling the dog. I think that was brought up by Khan Hughes on RPG TV a few weeks ago. Obviously now, current COVID, it's very hard. People can't share coats, obviously because of COVID reasons. But there must be a way to sort of smarten the presentation up a little bit, and not costing a great deal of money either.
No, Velcro numbers.
Yeah.
But if you had Velcro numbers that you could stick to, if each dog had a generic jacket, and just have Velcro numbers, or each trainer had a generic jacket for their dogs that you could Velcro a number to. To me, it's fairly simple.
Yeah.
But I completely agree with Carly. On parade, it's very difficult to gauge. You do get, obviously, people that watch RPG TV for the most part are punters and know the dogs. But anybody tuning in for the first time, when you go to a track, you hear the first time race go. We're always saying like, "Oh, I'm backing the white dog. I wonder what number he." You don't understand. I wonder what number he is. But if the number's on just a simple Velcro number on a jacket, it's quite an easy solution, in my opinion.
Very much so. Very much so. Was there anything else anybody wanted to bring up in terms of the tracks and the way we present, or the way the tracks?
I think the only other thing, Floyd, was we did talk about the commentators. Like, I think we've all agreed that commentaries do really add something, but I personally feel quite strongly that it shouldn't detract from the dogs and the race. It shouldn't be about gimmicks, it shouldn't be about phrases, it should be quite factual and adds the excitement. And I think equally there, and this has started to happen, which is fantastic.
Can you give me an example? What kind of thing do you mean?
Well, I think just make it more professional. Like when we're watching horse racing, you've got the horses are named, obviously, because they don't have, well, they do have a number, but it's not in the same way. But, if you've got a race commentary and all you hear are numbers, I think particularly at the present time, but to me, it should just be a given as well. If you're naming the dogs, there's got to be a point where you could mention an owner.
Yeah.
And I think just that would add, I think it'll just bring us a little bit further forward. I think we want to be seen as slick and professional as a sport. That personally, that's what I want to see. So that would be something that I'd like to see developed. And as I say, I think all these things that we've talked about, we've been talking about them for a while. And I think there have been some moves in the right direction, which is amazing. So I'm not suggesting it's anything to do with us, but if it's happening, then that's all good, isn't it?
I think so. All right, I want to kind of be a bit perverse because it's what I tend to do. Let me come up with some tracks. We're moaning about tracks that don't do it well. Give me some tracks that do. Give me, who would your examples be of tracks that are very slick and that everybody else should follow?
Help me here, ladies. I'd quite like the commentaries at Crayford. I think the guy, you know, is good there. I think Romford was. I'm not suggesting it's not now, but there's been a handover, hasn't there? So you know, inevitably, there's a bit of a, we've got to get used to that. And I think on RP, I think they've really taken notice there, and I think they are using dogs' names a lot more. I don't know what you guys think.
I mean, that to me, if you want a good example of professionalism, you only have to look at Ian Fortune. You know, very knowledgeable, very slick. He creates a great image for the sport, and obviously, likewise, before him, his father. And they're the commentaries that, whenever you look at anybody saying, name a great commentary, they're the ones they mention. Errol Blythe's another one that I think is also a very good commentator. And to me, a simple solution or a good idea perhaps would be perhaps doing an award for the best commentator, perhaps at the GBGB Awards, so that they aspire to be the best that they can be. And perhaps even name it in Michael Fortune's name for because he was such a great commentator, and it's something that people then can aspire to be. That is my opinion, anyway.
The one thing that occurs to me about that, and I agree about Ian Fortune, and it was something that his dad did as well, and it's something the Irish do far better than the Brits. Always, they take much more notice of the owner. So when Ian is calling home a winner, and the winner of the Guinness 600, owned by Mr. So and so, trained by so and so, bred by so and so, and they go into the detail. And it's not just that. It's not just the big race winners. When they introduce them, when they introduce the runners on parade, again, Ian is I think the best at it, introducing the runners on parade, giving the dogs the full lowdown, including the breeders. Now, I know in this it would be of greater relevance in Ireland than it is over here, probably because most 90% of the dogs are bred in Ireland anyway. But I do think it adds to something, and even in our races, sorry, I can't think of the guy's name at Romford that's just left, but he was
Steve Woodward.
Steve. So he was fantastic. When the dogs went to the pickup, he would give the full, and so and so, owned by Mr. So and so, trained by, and give it everything. And it takes no effort at all, really, or very little effort, just a little bit of being conscious that it matters. And if you're the owner, don't you want to hear your name being called out after you've just won a big race?
It was noticeable the other day when they had the racing on Toaster TV, and the graphics as the dogs were on parade. It was the usual name of the dog, breeding and trainer, but it actually had the owners on there. And I think that's where perhaps RPG are, and they're doing a great job. I don't want to criticise, but I think they're missing a trick. I think they've gone over to a new studio, new format, but it's the same format. Do you know what I mean? And I think actually that's an opportunity to develop. As you say, once I wouldn't have a clue how you set things like that up, but once they're set up, it shouldn't be too difficult. And that's where I think it'd be lovely if it could move. I think the fact that we're now showing racing from at least 3 different places is good, because I think that competition might make everybody raise their game a bit, which would be brilliant.
Yeah, certainly with Racing Post. Clearly they've moved into a new studio. Clearly it's making sure everything works and ironing out some things. But I would have thought there would be an opportunity then for them to say, do you know what? Now let's look at some. Now everybody's happy. We've got the basics going. Now let's look at some frills and some add-ons.